In the latest Nintendo Direct, Nintendo showed off even more of the Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, and so we figured we'd do what we do best to analyze the footage to see what secrets it might be hiding. But before we start, please make sure to check out our previous analysis if you haven't already, as we'll be passing over the things we've already pointed out before. You can find a link to it in the description below. And with that, let's get started. So right off the bat, we get our first look at the game's take on the Dark World from A Link to the Past. And as with the Light World, it looks remarkably similar to the way it did before. The color palette is similar, major structures are in the same places, and there are still skulls littered about that you can pick up and throw. But there are some notable differences too. And to help showcase them, let's put the two games side by side, with A Link Between Two Worlds on the left and A Link to the Past on the right. So the first notable difference is the fact that there are now campfires all over this portion of the Dark World. But what are they there for? Is it just for atmosphere, or does fire play a larger role in this game, or at least in the Dark World? And later in that same clip, we can see that the tree with a face on it in the Super Nintendo version is replaced by just your normal run-of-the-mill tree here. Is it just this one that's missing, or are these types of trees, some of which you can even talk to, gone completely? If so, this might actually hint at an even greater change. You see, whenever anyone entered the Dark World in A Link to the Past, their appearance would change to take on the form of whatever was reflected in their heart and mind. So those trees with faces on them were actually once people. Even Link himself would turn into a helpless rabbit until he obtained the Moon Pearl, which allowed him to retain his true form. So the fact that the tree is missing here could mean this is no longer the case. Or it could just mean that those types of trees simply aren't here this time around. But perhaps the most noticeable change in the Dark World is the fact that all the rivers have apparently run dry, leaving behind deep bottomless chasms. So it seems that swimming might be out of the question in the Dark World. Although this would mean that the Ice Palace Temple from A Link to the Past, which is located in the middle of a lake, would be inaccessible. So maybe you'll be able to restore the water at some point? Although the fact that the staircases in A Link to the Past that lead down to the waterways are missing in Between Two Worlds doesn't exactly bode well for this theory. And speaking of things that are missing, we can see that the path across the river here in the Super Nintendo version is missing completely in the 3DS game. But interestingly, the trailer also shows off that same area in the Light World, and sure enough, the path, being a bridge in this case, is still there. So it looks like the Light and Dark Worlds may have even greater differences this time around. But perhaps the Dark World's biggest difference is how you actually leave it to return to the Light World. You see, in A Link to the Past, going to the Dark World is basically a one-way street. Once you entered one of several portals from the Light World, there was no way to escape, except by using the magic mirror, which would instantly teleport you back to that exact location in the Light World. But this time around, we can see that Link can actually use his drawing ability to enter cracks in the wall that will teleport him from the Dark World to that same spot in the Light World, and presumably back again too. This is a pretty big addition, as it means you won't need the magic mirror to travel between dimensions. And not only that, but the cracks are easily visible as compared to the hidden portals you had to go searching for in A Link to the Past Light World. But we wonder, is this the only way to travel between dimensions? Could the magic mirror really be gone for good? We're not sure, but there's something else interesting here. In the trailer, we can see Link crossing the bridge to Hyrule Castle, but the clip's cut short just before he passes through the castle gate. Now in A Link to the Past, that gate actually acted as a portal to the Dark World, so could the fact that the clip ends just before he passes through it be a hint that it does so here as well? But beyond all this, perhaps the biggest question about the Dark World is, how? I mean, how does it exist, considering that it was restored to the Sacred Realm at the end of A Link to the Past? We're not sure, but we have some ideas. For one, the game clearly takes place in the future, as Link encounters an old wise man in the footage that retells the events of A Link to the Past, except he explains that this story is from the days of his grandfather's grandfather's grandfather, which means Between Two Worlds takes place 6 generations in the future, or a few hundred years, which also means we're playing as a completely new Link too. So clearly a lot can change in that amount of time. In fact, Iwata even pointed out that the game's logo contains a shadowy version of the Triforce, which he went on to say suggests that there's a second one to be found in the Dark World. So we're guessing that it just might be heavily involved in the Dark World's re-emergence. Okay, that's enough about the Dark World for now. Let's take a look at the Light World, as it too has undergone some changes. For one, there's now a stump of some kind just outside of Link's house. Can you bash it with your hammer, or is it used for some other purpose? Then in another clip, we can see there's a brand new path extending to the left here, whereas it was just a dead end in A Link to the Past. But where does it go? Well, if we take a look at the overworld map from A Link to the Past, we can see that it should take you to the house of the two swordsmiths, right next to Kakariko Village. So maybe this is just a handy shortcut. Now beyond the overworld, we also get a look at one of the new temples, and we know it's a temple based on the fact that Link's found a key here. This one appears to be shrouded in darkness, with only the sunlight beaming in through holes in the wall and the torches he can ignite providing light. So we're guessing by the fact that Link doesn't have a lantern here suggests that it may not be returning from A Link to the Past, since that was literally the first thing he found in that game. Now not surprisingly, it seems turning into a picture will factor in heavily throughout the dungeon. Though in this clip, we can see that Link will actually be able to refill his life by collecting painted hearts on the wall. And that's not all, because in another clip we can see some painted rupees that are similarly animated, suggesting he'll be able to grab those too. So it looks like he might be able to collect all kinds of things while in drawing form. Now in the same clip, we can see another use for the drawing power, as Link is able to ride the spinning section of the wall around to the other side after activating a nearby switch with a bomb. Now this latest round of footage also gives us a look at several returning enemies, who, by the way, appear in similar locations as in A Link to the Past, but seemingly in greater numbers now. From the Light World, we have Octoroks, Green Soldiers, Blue Soldiers, and Bomb Knights, who again take residence atop the castle walls. And from the Dark World, we have Octoroks, Red and Blue Tauruses, and Snapdragons. And if you freeze this scene right here, we can just barely see a Helmasaur in the corner. And finally, if we pause the first temple scene right here, we can see a ghost just before he disappears. The enemies aren't the only things returning, as we can see from this clip that the Pegasus shoes are back too, though this time they come complete with a nifty stopping animation. And that's not the only item that's back, as the game's director also posted a mysterious image of the game to Miiverse that showcases an item shop full of all kinds of goodies. But these aren't your usual array of collectibles like bombs and potions. Instead, it seems like this shop primarily sells items that you would normally only find in temples. Based on this image, we can see that the bow and arrow, magic hammer, boomerang, hookshot, fire rod, bombs, and ice rod are all back from A Link to the Past and are all purchasable. Oh, and this sign right here above the ice rod appears to be for a mushroom, which is also in A Link to the Past. But what does it do here? Is it still used to make magic powder? And why is it represented by a sign? Could it be that Link's already bought it once, so maybe it's sold out? Finally, just above that, there appears to be a brand new item. It's hard to tell what exactly it is, but it looks like it could be a propeller of some kind. Maybe you'll use it to blow on things? So as you can see, it's a pretty wide array of items, most of which are returning directly from A Link to the Past. But if most of them could only be found in temples before, what are they doing here in a shop? Can you really buy any of them at any time? If so, could this hint at a more open adventure where we can tackle the temples in any order? This actually would be in line with A Link to the Past, which also let you tackle the Dark World's temples in almost any order that you wanted. Anyways, between the 9 item slots and the bottle we already know about, this covers exactly half of the 20 available inventory slots you'll have available, which means there are still a lot more items that we don't know about. So is there another shop that contains them? Or maybe you'll still find some items in temples. And by the way, what's the deal with a shopkeeper who looks suspiciously similar to Nabbit from the new Super Mario Bros. Games? Is he wearing a rabbit costume, or is this his actual form? If it is, then we suspect this actually may be in the Dark World, which could mean that the Dark World will in fact still change people's forms in the game. And assuming that's the case, could there be an even deeper meaning to the shopkeeper's rabbit-like appearance, which is similar to the rabbit form that Link took on when he first entered the Dark World in A Link to the Past? Now, assuming this shop is indeed in the Dark World, is it possible this is what's inside the building seen here? After all, this was also an item shop in A Link to the Past, and not just any item shop, but one that sold an item essential to your quest, so it would make sense. But if this is the case, it looks like you'll be exploring the Dark World, or at least this shop, fairly early into the game based on the small amount of hearts in Link's life meter. And to take this theory even further, if we take a look at that Wise Man clip again, we can see his floor plan is almost identical to the shop's, right down to the rug with an identical pattern. Could his house actually be in the same location, just in the Light World? Maybe, or it could just be that the interiors all share a similar style. Finally, what's the weird creature here right next to Link's head? Is it a fairy, or is it the shop owner's pet? We really have no idea. Alright, we're almost done here, but as usual, there's still just a few final details I wanted to point out. For one, it appears that the stamina gauge wasn't just for the demos that we've played, as it's still in full use here, decreasing with each use of every inventory item, such as the fire rod and boomerang. And as we pointed out before, it still refills after a second or two, so it appears that this will in fact be replacing A Link to the Past magic meter. Finally, let's take a look at the statues in this Dark World scene. You might have noticed that they appear almost identical to the ones from A Link to the Past, right down to the Triforce on top. Except that Triforce is now flipped upside down. Weird. But this actually matches the upside down appearance of the shadowy Triforce in the game's logo. So it really does look like the Dark Triforce will play a pretty big role in the creation of this world. And with that, we're done covering everything we could dig up on The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. And like always, let us know if we missed anything by posting in the comments. If you liked our analysis, please make sure to like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at GameXplain. There are even super easy to click links in the description below. Thanks for watching, and make sure to keep an eye on GameXplain.com for more on The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds and other things gaming too.